Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm Shayna Cersei. I'm so excited to paint with you today. So today we are going to be going back to basics. I forget that sometimes folks watching this channel might be very brand new to watercolor, and a lot of you have said in the comments that you are very brand new to watercolor and you haven't barely touched your paints at all. So this is a very basic beginner kind of sketchbook practice, but it never hurts to go back and practice the basics. So we're going to talk a little bit about value today. That was a question recently that I had addressed. But I teach a beginner watercolor or an intro to watercolor class where we really go over introduction to all the basic supplies, materials, values, washes, the very, very basics. And we're going to paint an avocado today. Who doesn't want to paint an avocado? So let me draw out the avocado and then we'll just go over value a little bit and then we'll paint the avocado. How's that sound? Hopefully good. Okay, so I'm going to draw out just kind of a 3/4 view of an avocado so we can see both the outside of the rind, the fleshy part in the middle, and then the nut on the inside. This is going to be a very basic avocado. We're not going for like hyperrealism or anything here. We just want to demonstrate different values. So that's what we're going to be working on today. So this is the inside of the avocado, and then we're going to pretend it's on its side. It's cut in half. And we are going to give it like the little rind here. So that's the outside of the rind. And then the pit on the inside, it's raised. So this is the bottom, and then, or the nut, the pit, I'm not sure what it's called. So there we go. Kind of looks like a funky or a funky fried egg right now. But this is going to be the pit on the inside in brown. This is going to be a light green and a dark green. And our pit is going to have light brown and dark brown. So you get where I'm going with values here. So we paint a really basic shaped object that we can really talk just about light and dark values. And I try to keep it super simple so people aren't intimidated by the subject matter. So we're going to be using just 2 colors, maybe 3 actually, because I'm going to introduce some Payne's Gray. But really, we're going to use sap green, and we're going to use a burnt sienna and a little Payne's Gray. So let's pull those out. So those are our 3 colors. And I'm going to start by talking about value and what I have my students in person do and what you can do in your sketchbook, especially when you're just learning. Every color that you have, so every paint in your watercolor palette has many, many values to it, hundreds of different values if you're getting really nitty gritty, but we're just going to paint a couple. And the darkest values, the most concentrated value. So these thick, hard paints are at their most concentrated value. And when we add water to them, it starts to dilute the paint and it lightens the value. So the more paint, the darker the value. So my sap green here is at its pretty much darkest. I'm just gonna try to make it as dark as possible, having as much saturation of pigment while still being able to like pick it up with a brush and have it flow. So having enough water in it that it flows, but really at its darkest that I can get it. So that's the sap green right here. And let's put that out here. And on camera, when I first put this down, it's going to lighten as it dries, but that almost looks like black. It's really, really dark, right? So I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to add a little water to it. I'm going to add a little water to this sap green here on my palette. And now I'm going to paint another value. And this one is slightly lighter. And the more precise and controlled you get with this, when I say there's hundreds of values within a color, I'm sure there are, but we generally don't paint the whole spectrum of values. But you try to get as many as you can out of a color by adding very subtle, slight bits of water and working your way up slowly. So I just added a little bit more water to my palette, and you can see I'm not adding water to all of it. So like this part down here, I'm kind of like letting it be dark and not worrying about it. As I'm adding water, I'm pulling it up here. So I don't need to add gallons and buckets of water to get it lighter. I take a little bit of pigment, move it to the side, and add some water to it. So it's easier and goes more quickly. So here is another value. So slightly lighter, rinse my brush off, add a little more water to this upper part up here. A fourth value. And then you can even get to the point where you're just dipping your brush in water and pretty much taking off almost all the paint and just letting it be almost just a dirty brush with just a little hint or essence of paint or pigment on it. You can also make these in your palette too, but for this I would need a lot more spacer to clean that out. So look at all of these variations in value. This is all from the same paint. I haven't added any different colors to it. All I did was add water to it. So this is value. And now we're going to paint this lovely little avocado with some different values. Same color. I may add some Payne's Gray to zhuzh it up a little bit. But again, I got to go find a bunch of kneaded erasers. If you saw the last video, I hate using these erasers with watercolor because it gets all these little bits everywhere, and then you got to wipe them off the page, and they ruin your page. Go get yourself a kneaded eraser. Mine are just packed up from taking them all to a class. I haven't unpacked them yet. Okay, so our avocado that we drew out, we're going to start with our lightest values and paint darker. You can always add more layers later on. So you can always go darker if you start too light and you're like, ooh, that's just too light. But you can't go lighter. You can a little bit. You can lift out color every once in a while, but it's much harder and you can't get back to white, that's for sure. So I am actually going to paint in a nice light value in the fleshy part of my avocado. I kind of went a little bit inside my little nut and made it a little flat, but that's okay. I'm going to fix it later. I'm using a size 10 Princeton Velvet Touch brush. Doesn't really matter what size for something like this. 10 works for me. If you had a 6, if you're painting a little smaller, it'll lift out a little bit, but that's going to be brown. It'll be fine later. Okay. So that is the lightest value. Now I'm going to go in with a much darker value on the bottom part. You do want this section to dry first. So I'm going to hit it with my heat tool really quick. There we go. That should be dry enough. And I'm going to go in with a darker value. So this is kind of like one of the medium values here, because we'll add some more to get even darker in an additional layer. So this is the part that's going to be the rind, the outside. And of course, a super ripe avocado is going to be like really, really dark. There we go. So that's the bottom section. And then while that's still wet, I'm going to take some of my super, super dark. I'm going to add it right to the bottom, wet on wet. And I'm going to go a little bit around the edge here with the tip of my brush. And I have just a nice damp brush. It's not wet, but I'm going to blend this in so it's darkest on the bottom. All right, there's the outside of our avocado. Now let's do the same thing with the nut. The nut is glossy and shiny. It's got reflection on it. It will have darker spots. So I'm using burnt sienna here, and I'll add a little Payne's Gray at some point. So let's put on a light layer, a light value. of brown, or of this burnt sienna, this reddish brown color. Okay, and that looks kind of flat. So how do we create form? We add shadows. So I'm going to put on, this is still really wet, so it's probably going to bleed a little more than I want it to. But putting that on, we're going to let this dry before we do our next layer for sure. I'm going to pull out color. All right, let's let it dry once again, and then we'll come back and put on another layer of a darker, even darker value, so that way we can get that full shape and form. All right, here we are. Our center is nice and dry. I'm going to pull out more super dark, well, super saturated, concentrated, and the darkest value of this burnt sienna. And I'm going to go around the bottom in like a curved shape. And then I'm going to take my damp brush and I'm going to blend it out. So blending my darker value into my lighter value. And basically creating a medium value in between. And then I'm going to go darker, but I am going to add Payne's Gray. So I'm going to create a different color brown. This is a different color, but it is also a darker value. And I'm going to add that just to the edge while that's still wet to create even more. So there we have it, our little avocado. So you can practice this. This is great to practicing your values, reminding yourself that each color has so many different options within it. We should have done a little map out of our burnt sienna as well in the beginning, and that will give you a range, but we can do that across the top right now. So this is kind of our darkest, most saturated color. Rinse that brush off, add some water, slightly lighter. And you can make your swatches whatever shape you want. If you prefer circles, go for circles. If you prefer just other funky shapes, go for it. And this is great when you are starting to explore a project and think you might want to paint something a little bigger or more complex, but mapping out values and mapping out colors to see what you have to work with. I just want to add another layer of this on here. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me for another watercolor journal day for our journal ideas. This was a back to basics, kind of learning value again, doing a nice simple little avocado. I hope you enjoyed it and it wasn't too basic for you and you gleaned a little bit of information from it. Thanks for joining me once again. Don't forget to check out the description for links to supplies and materials. Leave a comment and I will see you for another watercolor journal idea day soon.